Atlas found the right answer, and then he walked away from it. That was the moment the whole K9 field at Camp Pendleton forgot how to breathe. 3-cent boxes sat in a clean row on the dry California dirt, each one spaced a few feet apart, simple enough for a beginner drill and too simple for a dog like Atlas to miss. The morning sun had just cleared the low buildings beyond the range, turning the white boundary ropes bright and sharp, while the air carried the familiar smell of dust, rubber mats, cut grass, and the faint salt of the Pacific drifting in from miles away. Caleb Rowe stood behind Atlas with the lead loose in his hand, his white-skinned face calm beneath the brim of his cap, though his eyes were fixed on the little German shepherd with the kind of attention that looked almost like prayer. Commander Hayes stood off to the right with a clipboard tucked under one arm. He had made the test plain on purpose. No obstacles, no crowd noise, no decoys scattered across the field. Just 3 boxes, 1 target cloth, and a question everyone expected Atlas to answer correctly. Around them, handlers waited near the rail, some curious, some doubtful, all quiet enough to hear the soft scrape of Atlas's paws as Caleb gave the command. Find. Atlas lowered his nose and moved forward. Slow, careful, certain. He passed the first box after 1 breath, reached the second, and stopped. Caleb saw the change immediately. Atlas's ears lifted half an inch. His tail stilled. His nose touched the seam of the lid. That was it. The right box. The right scent. The right answer. A few handlers shifted as if ready to nod, and even Hayes lifted his pen to mark the pass. But Atlas did not sit. He did not alert. He raised his head, turned toward the far edge of the field, and looked past the test entirely. The silence changed shape. Caleb felt it before anyone spoke. Atlas was not confused. He was listening. Beyond the boundary rope, near the storage area, an equipment cart sat beside the fence, loaded with cones, towels, ropes, and training pads from the early morning setup. Nothing about it belonged to the test. Nothing about it should have mattered. Atlas stepped away from the second box. 1 step, then another. A handler near the rail gave a quiet sigh, the kind people make when they think hope has just embarrassed itself. Commander Hayes lowered his pen. That is not the exercise, he said, voice flat. Caleb did not pull the leash. Atlas walked past the 3rd box without looking at it and moved toward the cart with the calm determination of a dog, following something more honest than a rule. Dust rose around his sable paws. His amber eyes stayed locked ahead. The 3 boxes remained behind him, perfect and useless. And Caleb, watching the little German shepherd leave the answer everyone wanted, understood with a sudden tightness in his chest that Atlas had not failed. He had refused to stop at the easiest truth. 3 days earlier, Atlas had been called distracted by men who only noticed where his paws went, not why they went there. It happened during a routine tracking drill behind the K9 compound, where the scent line curved from the water station to a row of low barriers and ended at a blue training cone near the fence. The drill should have been easy. Caleb Rowe knew that. Commander Hayes knew it too. So did the other handlers watching from the rail with coffee cups in hand and dust on their boots. Atlas started well, nose down, lead loose, sable coat catching the morning light as he followed the scent across the dry ground. Then, halfway through the lane, he stopped. His ears turned toward the storage shed. A small metal latch on one of the equipment bins had not caught properly, and each breath of wind made it click against the frame. Click. Pause. Click. Atlas left the scent line and walked straight to it. A handler chuckled. Someone said, "There he goes again." Caleb said nothing. He watched Atlas sit in front of the bin and look back once, not proud, not guilty, just certain that something open should not be open. Mason checked the latch, pushed it closed, and gave Caleb a small shrug, as if the dog had done something useful but still inconvenient. The next drill went much the same. Atlas ignored the marked path to inspect a towel that had slipped from a bench and fallen partly into the dirt. The towel carried a trace of the target scent, old and faint, mixed with sunscreen and the sharp smell of cleaning solution. Atlas nosed it once, then moved on. Later, when a cart wheel squeaked near the storage area, Atlas paused again, head tilted, eyes focused on the small, uneven sound as if it belonged to a larger sentence no one else was reading. Commander Hayes finally called Caleb aside near the shade canopy. He was not angry. That made his words harder to dismiss. "Rowe, He is finding everything except what I ask him to find. Caleb looked across the field at Atlas, who had settled beside the boundary rope with his amber eyes fixed on a corner of the yard where two recruits were unloading training pads. He is finding what changes, Caleb said. Hayes held the clipboard against his side. AK-9 in the field cannot chase every change. No, sir. Caleb's voice stayed quiet. But he should notice the right ones. Hayes studied him for a long moment, the sun bright on the gray at his temples. Then we will remove the excuses. No moving parts. No mixed lanes. No obstacles. 3 boxes. 1 target. If he cannot pass that, he is not ready for advanced tracking. Caleb accepted the order because Marines know how to receive weight without showing where it lands. Atlas trotted over then, small for his breed, calm in his body, eyes too alert to be empty. He pressed his nose briefly to Caleb's glove, then looked past him toward the equipment cart being rolled into the storage area for the next morning. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing seemed wrong. Not yet. But Atlas kept looking, and Caleb felt the first quiet question take shape inside him. What if the dog was not losing focus at all? What if everyone else was focusing too small? That night, Caleb Rowe returned to his small room near the K9 compound with the kind of silence that follows a question no one has answered yet. The room was neat because Caleb needed it that way. Boots beneath the chair, training gloves folded beside the closed notebook, lead hanging from the wall hook, coffee tin placed squarely in the cabinet. Order had always helped him think. It gave shape to hours that might otherwise spread too wide. But after the warning from Commander Hayes, the room felt less like order and more like a test Caleb had built around himself. Atlas entered behind him and paused at the doorway, nose lifting toward the faint evening air slipping through the cracked window. The German shepherd did not hurry to his blanket. He listened first. Somewhere outside, a cart rolled over uneven concrete. Farther away, a kennel latch clicked once, then settled. A Marine laughed near the water station, the sound brief and tired. Atlas sorted it all without moving, as if the world was always speaking and his job was to decide which whisper mattered. Caleb watched him from beside the desk. They think you are distracted, he said softly. Atlas turned his amber eyes toward him. There was no offense in them. No worry. Only attention. That was the thing people missed. Atlas was not careless. He was almost too careful, drawn not to noise, but to wrongness. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed one hand across his face. He had spent most of his adult life trusting procedure. Check the gear. Read the map. Follow the lane. Confirm the target. Procedure was how a man kept fear from making decisions for him. Procedure was how teams stayed safe when the world got loud. Caleb believed in it. He still did. But Atlas made him uneasy in a different way, because the dog kept finding the places where procedure ran out of language. A checklist could say 3 boxes, 1 scent cloth, correct alert. It could not say notice the cartwheel that carries yesterday's scent. It could not say follow the hint of sunscreen, stress sweat, and cleaning solution drifting under the clean target. It could not say trust the small dog when he refuses the easy answer. Atlas walked to the blanket then, circled once, and lay down with his head still raised. His ears twitched toward the yard. Caleb followed his gaze through the window. Under the security lights, the storage area sat quiet behind the fence, equipment carts lined in shadows, cones stacked in neat orange towers, training pads covered by a tarp that moved gently in the breeze. Nothing obvious. Nothing dramatic. Still, Atlas watched it as if something about the day had not finished speaking. Caleb stood and crossed to the window. His reflection looked back at him, pale in the glass, a Marine trying to measure instinct with rules. Behind him, Atlas gave one low breath, not a growl, not a warning, just a sound of awareness. Caleb rested his hand on the windowsill. What did you catch out there? He whispered. The dog did not answer, of course. Dogs rarely answer the way people want. They answer by staying awake when others sleep, by turning their head before a sound becomes important, by refusing to leave a trail just because someone drew a cleaner one. Caleb looked at the 3 empty scent boxes stacked near the far shed, ready for tomorrow's test, and felt the question deepen. What if passing was not the same as seeing? What if the simplest test on the field was about to miss the only thing that mattered? By sunrise, Commander Hayes had already made the field smaller. That was the point. He removed the barriers, the moving carts, the extra scent lanes, the loose towels, the stacked pads, the squeaking wheels, every little thing Atlas had noticed during the week, and every little thing Hayes believed had pulled him away from proper work. What remained was almost bare. 3-cent boxes sat in a straight row on dry California dirt, each one separated by a few feet and facing the rail where the handlers would watch. A single target cloth had been placed in the middle box. No trick, no hidden complication, no room, as Hayes put it, for interpretation. Caleb Rowe arrived with Atlas at his left side just as the sun began to warm the white boundary ropes. The air smelled of clean dust, rubber mats, and coffee drifting from the hands of Marines gathered near the fence. Atlas walked calmly, sable coat brushed by the breeze, amber eyes moving once toward the boxes, then toward the storage area beyond the far edge of the range. Caleb saw the glance. Hayes saw it too. "Rowe," the commander said, stepping forward with his clipboard. "Today he tracks what he is assigned to track." Caleb stood still, white-skinned face quiet beneath his cap, hand relaxed around the lead. "Yes, sir." Hayes looked down at Atlas, not unkindly, but with a patience that had become firm. "If he cannot pass this, he does not move to advanced tracking. We cannot build advanced work on a dog that will not answer a basic question." Atlas sat while the two men spoke, ears high, head slightly turned toward a cart near the fence where equipment had been unloaded before dawn. It was covered in cones, ropes, training towels, and a folded tarp. Nothing about it moved now. Nothing called attention to itself. That made Caleb notice it more. Hayes followed Atlas's gaze and exhaled through his nose. "No, Atlas," he said, as if correction could travel through the air before the mistake happened. "Not today." The little German shepherd blinked, then looked back at the boxes. Caleb crouched beside him and checked the collar, though it was already fitted correctly. It gave his fingers something to do. "You know the work," Caleb whispered. Atlas leaned into the touch for half a second, then lifted his nose. The wind came lightly from the storage side of the field, passing over the cart before crossing the scent boxes. Caleb felt that detail settle in his mind like a small stone dropped into still water. Hayes stepped back to the line. Mason stood near the rail, arms folded, watching with the uneasy look of a man who wanted Atlas to pass, but no longer knew what passing meant. The handlers quieted. Even the other dogs seemed to sense the test had become more than 3 boxes and a piece of cloth. Caleb rose. The lead hung loose between his hand and Atlas's collar. Hayes raised his pen. "Begin when ready." For a moment, Caleb looked only at Atlas. Not at the boxes. Not at Hayes. Not at the watching field. He remembered the latch, the towel, the wheel, the way Atlas kept finding what changed instead of what shined brightest in front of him. Then Caleb gave the command, soft and clear. "Find." Atlas lowered his head and stepped into the test, built to prove him wrong. Atlas moved into the 3-box test with the calm of a dog who had already heard the answer and was now checking whether people were ready to see it. His nose stayed low to the dirt, following the clean scent trail laid across the morning field. The first box passed beneath him in one slow breath. He did not stop. He did not glance back. A few handlers near the rail shifted their weight, waiting for the obvious moment. Caleb Rowe stood behind him with the lead loose, feeling the quiet pressure of every eye on his back. Commander Hayes held his pen over the clipboard, ready to write the result that would settle the argument. Atlas reached the second box and stopped. Everything in his body changed by a fraction. His shoulders settled. His ears lifted. His nose touched the seam near the lid, exactly where the target scent gathered strongest. Caleb knew the signal before it came, and for one brief second, hope rose across the rail like light. Mason whispered something under his breath. Hayes leaned forward. This was it. The clean answer. The proof. Atlas had found the target cloth. Then the little German shepherd did not sit. He did not give the trained alert. Instead, he held there for one long second, breathing in the scent, then raised his head toward the storage side of the range. The breeze moved across the equipment cart and over the 3 boxes, carrying with it a second thread of scent, thinner, newer, mixed with sunscreen, dust, cleaning solution, and the faint salt of human stress. Atlas took one step back from the correct box. A handler exhaled sharply. Another muttered, "No way." Hayes's pen stopped moving. Caleb felt his own hand tighten, then forced it open again. Trust does not mean much until it has something to lose. Atlas turned away from the middle box. He walked past the third without checking it, crossed the line of disturbed dirt, and headed for the cart near the fence. "Row," Hayes said, low and controlled. Caleb did not pull the lead. "Let him finish, sir. The target is in the box." "Yes, sir." Caleb's voice was quiet, but his eyes stayed on Atlas. "He knows." That answer made the field even quieter. Atlas reached the cart and circled the front wheel once. His nose worked along the rubber tire, down to the metal bracket, then beneath the frame where dust had gathered in a dark crescent. He sat, perfect alert, straight back, still tail, amber eyes fixed on the space below the cart. It was not the assigned box. It was not the drill anyone had planned. But there was no uncertainty in him. Hayes walked toward them, clipboard against his side, his face set in the stern expression of a man trying not to mistake irritation for truth. "That is a fail," he said. Caleb crouched beside Atlas and looked under the cart. Something pale was caught near the wheel, no bigger than 2 fingers, partly hidden under dust and a strand of rope fiber. A torn edge of cloth. Old target scent. Fresh human trace. Caleb looked up slowly. "Maybe," he said. "But he found something we did not place here." Mason was the first to kneel beside the cart, careful not to touch the small torn cloth until Hayes gave a short nod. The field had gone so still that the distant gulls beyond the base sounded too loud. Caleb Rowe kept one hand resting lightly on Atlas's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of the German shepherd's breathing beneath his palm. Atlas did not shift. He did not look proud. He simply held the alert, eyes fixed on the underside of the cart, as if the truth might slip away if everyone stopped paying attention. Mason reached under the frame with 2 fingers and eased the cloth free. It was frayed at one edge, dusty, and marked with the faint blue stripe used on older training targets. Hayes's expression changed by almost nothing, but Caleb saw the pause. The commander recognized it. "That should have been retired last week," Mason said softly. "It must have caught on the cart during cleanup." Hayes took the cloth without speaking and lifted it closer. The breeze touched it, then moved toward Atlas, toward the boxes, toward the rail where the handlers stood silent. Caleb could almost see the trail now, not with his eyes, but through the dog's answer. Old target scent on the cloth, fresh dust from the cart wheel, cleaning solution from the storage shed, sunscreen from whoever had moved it, and beneath that, something human and recent that made Atlas refuse the easier finish. Hayes looked toward the middle scent box, still waiting in the row like a correct answer no one wanted anymore. "He found both," Mason said. No one argued. Atlas had stopped at the middle box. Everyone had seen it. He had known the assigned target and left it anyway. That was the part that made the morning feel larger than a test. Caleb crouched lower, looking under the cart where the cloth had been stuck. The wheel had dragged a narrow line through the dirt from the storage shed to the fence, then toward the shade canopy before being pushed back. Atlas's nose lowered to the ground again. His body leaned forward, not done. Caleb felt it through the lead before the dog moved. "Sir," Caleb said, "he still has the trail." Hayes's first instinct showed in his eyes. Stop the test, mark the result, contain the irregularity. But Atlas turned his head toward the shade canopy, ears high. Waiting for the permission people kept being slow to give. For a second, Hayes looked at the dog instead of the clipboard. Then he stepped back. "Follow him." Caleb gave one soft word. "Track." Atlas rose and moved away from the cart, nose low, not rushing, not wandering, following a trail no one had meant to lay. The handlers parted without being told. The 3 boxes sat behind them in the sun, simple and abandoned. Atlas crossed the dirt toward the water station, paused near a stack of folded towels, then continued to the shaded bench where a young recruit, Daniel Price, sat too still with his elbows on his knees. Daniel looked up and tried to smile as the dog approached. "Did I mess up the cart?" he asked, voice light but tired. Atlas stopped in front of him and sat, the same perfect alert he had given beneath the cart. Caleb saw the water bottle beside Daniel, unopened. He saw the faint shine of sweat at the young Marine's temple, the dust on his sleeves from moving equipment before sunrise, the way he held himself very carefully, as if stillness could pass for strength. Hayes arrived a few steps behind and said nothing. Mason lowered the torn cloth in his hand. The test had asked Atlas to find a scent. Atlas had followed it to the person who needed noticing. Daniel Price tried to sit a little straighter when Atlas stopped in front of him, because pride can be quiet and still be heavy. He was young, sun-browned from long mornings on the range, and determined in the way good Marines often are when they mistake endurance for silence. "I am all right," he said before anyone asked. His voice was steady enough to fool a person listening from 10 feet away. Atlas was not listening from 10 feet away. He was sitting close enough to read the small things. The careful breath, the unopened water bottle, the faint tremor in the hand resting against Daniel's knee, the scent of sunscreen, dust, cleaning solution, and effort gathered around the torn training cloth like a story no one had meant to write. Caleb Rowe crouched beside Atlas, one hand on the dog's collar, his white-skinned face calm but focused. "Price," he said gently, "when did you move that cart?" Daniel blinked toward the equipment area. "Before sunrise. Mason needed the lanes cleared. I just helped bring it out and load the boards." Mason looked down at the torn cloth in his hand. "You were supposed to grab breakfast after that." Daniel gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I was going to." The words were light. Too light. Commander Hayes stood at the edge of the shade, clipboard lowered, watching the scene with the restrained stillness of a man seeing his own test become smaller by the second. Atlas leaned forward and touched one paw to Daniel's boot, the same clean signal he used when the track had reached its answer. Not the box, not the cart, the Marine. Caleb looked at the unopened water bottle beside the bench, then at the tightness around Daniel's eyes. "Medic check," he said. Daniel started to protest, but Hayes spoke first. "That is an order." No one raised their voice. No one needed to. A medic came from the station near the rail, calm and quick, and the whole field seemed to soften around the simple truth that help had arrived early enough to stay ordinary. Daniel had been overworked by the morning heat, mildly dehydrated, and too determined to step away from the drill. It was not dramatic. That was what made Atlas's choice matter more, not less. He had not waited for a crisis to become obvious. He had followed a faint trail of need while everyone else was still looking for a passing score. As the medic checked Daniel, Atlas remained seated nearby, ears forward, eyes steady, breathing even. Caleb stayed beside him, the lead loose across his palm. Hayes looked back toward the 3-cent boxes in the middle of the field. They were still lined up perfectly, still holding the simple question he had asked. Then he looked at the torn cloth, the cart tracks in the dirt, Daniel under the canopy, and the small German shepherd who had connected them all without a word. He knew the box, Mason said quietly. He just knew it was not the end of the trail. Hayes did not answer. He only lowered the clipboard a little farther, until it hung at his side like something that had lost its authority for a moment. Caleb touched Atlas between the ears. "Good track," he whispered. Atlas looked up once, then back to Daniel, as if praise could wait until the person was safe. The medical check lasted only a few minutes, but it changed the shape of the whole morning. Daniel Price sat under the shade canopy with a fresh bottle of water in his hands, looking embarrassed in the soft way people do when they realize help came before trouble had a chance to grow. The medic spoke calmly, told him to rest, hydrate, and skip the next round of drill. No one made it dramatic. No one needed to. The truth was quiet enough to be trusted. Daniel had moved equipment before sunrise, handled the old target cloth without noticing it had caught beneath the cart, pushed through the heat, skipped breakfast, and tried to keep working because he did not want to slow the team down. To most people, those were separate details. To Atlas, they had been one trail. The torn cloth, the cartwheel, the sunscreen, the cleaning solution, the tired breath under the canopy, the unopened water bottle. The small German shepherd had followed the story from object to person, from test to need, and he had done it without being asked the right question. Caleb Rowe stood beside him with the lead hanging loose, his hand resting lightly on Atlas's back. He could feel the dog's breathing, steady and warm beneath the sable coat dusted at the paws. Atlas watched Daniel until the young Marine drank, then lowered his head slightly, as if a task had finally been completed. Commander Hayes walked back toward the 3-cent boxes in the middle of the field. They looked almost strange now. Too neat, too small, too certain. The middle box still held the assigned target cloth, the answer everyone had wanted. Hayes stared at it for a long moment. Then he turned and looked at the path Atlas had taken, from the box to the cart, from the cart to the shade, from the shade to Daniel. A line no instructor had drawn, a line no clipboard had measured. Mason stood nearby with the torn cloth folded carefully in one hand. "Sir," he said, cautious. Technically, he identified the target sent first. Hayes did not look away from Atlas. Technically, he replied, he left the test. Caleb's shoulders stayed square, but his voice was low. Yes, sir. The field waited. A gull called somewhere beyond the fence, and the morning breeze moved through the boundary ropes with a faint whisper. Hayes lowered the clipboard against his thigh. And if he had not? No one answered, because the answer was sitting in the shade, safe, drinking water, smiling weakly at the dog who had noticed him. Hayes exhaled slowly, not defeated, not angry, but changed by evidence he respected. He walked back to Caleb and Atlas. The little German shepherd looked up at him without wagging, without apology. Hayes studied those amber eyes, the still body, the quiet certainty. He did not chase a distraction, Hayes said. He followed a continuation. Caleb felt the words settle like sunlight after cloud cover. Mason smiled down at the torn cloth. Daniel lifted his water bottle slightly from the bench, a small salute of gratitude. Hayes looked once more at the boxes. Reset the field later, he said. Then, after a pause, not now. The handlers remained quiet as the morning opened around them. Atlas finally stood and moved back beside Caleb's boot. Not proud, not restless, simply done. Caleb let the lead stay loose. For the first time that day, the three boxes were no longer the center of the story. The center was a small dog who had understood that the right answer is not always the final answer. The next morning, Commander Hayes asked for the 3-cent boxes to be placed back on the field. Not for a retest. Not for punishment. For understanding. Camp Pendleton was quiet under the early sun, the air cool before the day could turn bright and hard. The boxes sat in their same straight line on the dry dirt, simple and still, while the equipment cart rested near the fence and the shade canopy stretched beyond it. Daniel Price had returned on light duty, carrying a water bottle this time, and when he passed Atlas, he gave the little German shepherd a grateful nod that needed no words. Caleb Rose stood beside Atlas near the rail, the lead loose in his hand, his white-skinned face calm, but softer than it had been the day before. Atlas sat at his boot, sable coat brushed clean, amber eyes moving from the boxes to Hayes and back again, as if willing to sit through one more human attempt to name what had already happened. Hayes walked to the middle box and rested his hand on the lid. This was the right answer, he said. The handlers stood quietly along the fence. Mason held the torn cloth in a clear evidence sleeve, careful now with something that had become more than scrap. Hayes looked toward the cart, then toward the canopy where Daniel had been sitting. But it was not the whole trail. Caleb said nothing. Atlas lowered his head once, then lifted it again. Hayes returned to them, clipboard absent, whistle tucked away where it no longer ruled the moment. He stopped in front of Caleb and looked down at the dog. He did not fail the test, Hayes said. He refused the wrong question. The words moved across the field slowly, finding every person who had watched Atlas walk away from the box and mistaken purpose for failure. Caleb crouched beside Atlas and brushed a little dust from the dog's collar. His hand moved slowly, because small acts are sometimes the only safe place for big feelings. Atlas leaned into him, not proud, not dramatic, simply present. Hayes gave one firm nod. Advanced tracking, he said. Keep him on the list. Mason smiled before he could hide it. Daniel did too. The morning seemed to open wider around them, sunlight catching the white ropes, the orange cones, the metal edges of the cart, all the ordinary things that had carried a hidden story until a dog cared enough to follow it. Caleb stood and let the lead slide loose through his fingers. Atlas stepped beside him, then paused by the three boxes. He sniffed the middle one once, sat briefly, and looked up at Caleb, as if to say he had known that answer all along. Caleb smiled, faint but real. I know, he whispered. Then Atlas rose and walked with him toward the open field, past the test, past the cart, past the place where everyone had learned that sometimes the truth is not where the question points. Sometimes it waits farther down the trail, quiet and easy to miss, until loyalty refuses to stop looking.